1935, R G LeTourneau stood before his accountant with an announcement that made no financial sense. He wanted to give away 90% of everything, not 90% of profits, 90% of his personal income, 90% of company stock. The accountant nearly quit. LeTourneau was a 6th grade dropout running a manufacturing empire during the Great Depression. His competitors gave standard charitable donations. He was proposing to live on 1/10 of what he earned. "It's not how much of my money I give to God," he'd say, "but how much of God's money I keep for myself." This is the story of the man who moved heaven and earth. The Dropout. November 30th, 1888, Richford, Vermont. Robert Gilmore. LeTourneau entered a world that didn't need another mouth to feed. His parents, Caleb and Elizabeth, were devout Plymouth Brethren, serious Christians who prayed daily and expected their children to follow suit. Young Bob had other ideas. He was restless, destructive, his brothers said, willful and stubborn, determined to amount to nothing. By age 12, he'd built his first invention, a heifer-pulled snowplow. It might have worked if the heifer had cooperated. It didn't. Neither did Bob cooperate with formal education. School bored him. Sitting still was torture. At 14, in 1902, he walked out of 6th grade with his parents' blessing, but considerable concern, and never looked back. Portland, Oregon became his first stop. The East Portland Iron Works needed apprentices, and LeTourneau needed to eat. The foundry was hot, dangerous work. Molten metal, swinging hammers, men who cursed and drank and taught a kid from Vermont how the world really worked. He learned ironwork, he learned machining. He took a correspondence course in mechanics that he never quite finished, but the concept stuck. Knowledge for LeTourneau came through his hands, through doing, through breaking things, and figuring out how to fix them better than they'd been before. San Francisco called next. At the Yerba Buena power plant, he discovered welding. The acetylene torch became his favorite tool, an extension of his brain. He could see how pieces should fit together, could imagine joints that would hold under stress that rivets couldn't match. Then, in April 1906, the earth moved. The great San Francisco earthquake destroyed the city, but it created opportunity. During the rebuilding, LeTourneau sold photographs of the devastation and learned that disaster meant work for those willing to get their hands dirty. But something happened in Portland that changed everything. It was the week before Christmas, 1904. LeTourneau was 16, large and muscular from 2 years of foundry work. His heart hardened to the things of God, despite his parents' daily prayers. A crusade came to town. He attended more out of boredom than conviction. After a week of singing and sermons, he felt nothing. No tremor of response. That terrified him more than the hell the preachers described. The absence of feeling meant something was wrong with him, not just with his choices. He prayed, simply, desperately, "Lord, save me." No bolts of lightning, no flash of awareness, just a draining away of bitterness and a vast relief he couldn't contain. He'd later describe it as becoming aware of another presence, though no words were spoken and no messages received. His parents' prayers had prevailed. By 1917, LeTourneau had bounced through a dozen jobs: woodcutter, farmhand, miner, carpenter's laborer. He'd learned something from each, building a mental catalog of how things worked and how they failed. In Stockton, California, he became half owner of the Superior Garage. He was an excellent mechanic by now, with a complete understanding of the combustion engine. Despite breaking his neck, literally in a car racing accident, he and the business prospered. That year, he married Evelyn Peterson. She was 16, the daughter of a draying company owner from Minnesota. He was 28, scarred and beat up, but ambitious. They lost their first child in infancy. The neck injury from the racing accident would plague him for life, leaving him 4F when World War I came. Instead of fighting overseas, LeTourneau worked at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California, as a maintenance assistant. There, he improved his welding skills and nearly died from Spanish influenza during the 1918 pandemic. After the war, he returned to Stockton to discover his business partner had drunk the Superior Garage into oblivion. LeTourneau found himself $5,000 in debt, over $80,000 in today's money. He was 31, married, broke, and staring at the wreckage of his first real business venture. A banker asked how he intended to repay the debt. LeTourneau held up his 2 hands. Impressed by his determination and honesty, the banker extended the loan. LeTourneau needed work. A wealthy rancher hired him to repair a Holt crawler tractor, then to use it to level 40 acres. The job was simple: attach a scraper blade, drag it behind the tractor, move dirt from high spots to low spots. It was the most satisfying work LeTourneau had ever done. He wanted to move dirt, lots of dirt, not with shovels and mules like his competitors, but with machines that could do the work of hundreds of men. He'd found his calling. He just didn't know it would cost him everything before it made him rich. Dirt and Destiny, January 1920. LeTourneau bought a used Holt tractor and rented a scraper. He hung out his shingle, land leveling contractor. The equipment was primitive. Scrapers were little more than steel boxes dragged behind tractors, filled by gravity and human muscle, dumped by the same. 3 men typically ran a scraper, 1 driving the tractor, 2 riding the scraper to control the blade and watch for obstacles. It was slow, inefficient, and exactly the kind of challenge that made LeTourneau's mind race. By May 1921, he'd purchased land in Stockton and established a small engineering workshop. Combining contracting work with equipment manufacturing, he began experimenting. His first insight was simple. Why did it take 3 men to do what one could do with the right controls? He designed a power control unit that allowed a single operator to raise, lower, and dump the blade from the tractor seat. That innovation alone tripled productivity while cutting labor costs by 2/3. But scrapers still had a fundamental problem. They didn't fill themselves efficiently. Gravity and forward motion only worked on certain soil types. LeTourneau invented the world's first motor scraper in 1923, powered by a gas generator with 7 electric motors placed at points on the machine that required power. It was efficient, but limited by 1920s technology to 1 mile per hour. Still, the concept proved sound. Machines could do more than humans ever could if someone smart enough designed them right. The 1920s brought steady growth. LeTourneau completed major earth-moving projects: the Boulder Highway to Hoover Dam in Nevada, the Marysville Levees, Orange County Dam, the Newhall Cutoff in California. Each job taught him something about what worked and what didn't. Each job pushed him to innovate further. By 1929, his business interests incorporated as R G LeTourneau Incorporated. Then came 1927, the crisis that would define everything. LeTourneau was 39, successful but cocky. His business had grown. Profits looked strong. The previous year, he'd withheld his $5,000 annual missions pledge to the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church, over $90,000 in today's dollars. His reasoning seemed sound. Reinvest the money, grow the business, give God an even bigger share next year, when he anticipated $100,000 in profit. God was not mocked. Within a year, that anticipated $100,000 profit became a $100,000 loss, roughly $1.8 million in current dollars. A big construction job had gone catastrophically wrong. The surety company that had backed the project was determined that LeTourneau pay back every penny. His bookkeeper was ready to quit. He had no money for payroll. He was facing financial annihilation. The surety company made their terms clear. Work on Sundays, or we foreclose on everything. Your business, your house, your equipment, everything you've built. Work 7 days or lose it all. LeTourneau was stubborn and self-reliant by nature, but he was also serious about his faith. He dedicated himself to Christ at 16. He attended church. He believed God was real and that honoring the Sabbath mattered. But $100,000 in debt with demands to work Sundays was the kind of test that separates what people say they believe from what they actually believe. He wrestled with the decision. Then he gave the problem to his business partner. LeTourneau refused to work Sundays. He told the surety company no. He also made good on his missed pledge, committing $5,000 for the year he'd skipped and another $5,000 for the current year, in the face of massive debt and no money to pay it. What happened next, LeTourneau would describe as a miracle. The surety company installed an accountant named Mr. Frost to monitor the business. Frost expected to find a disaster. He did. The books were worse than anticipated, but he also found something he couldn't explain. Somehow, against all logic, the business stayed afloat. Contracts came through, payments arrived, the missions commitment was paid in full. Then the breakthrough happened. An executive from the surety company, Mr. Hall, traveled from San Francisco to take over the job personally. LeTourneau expected the worst. Instead, Hall walked onto the site, looked around, and told him, "I came here to take over this job. Something happened on the way here that changed my mind. Keep going." LeTourneau knew what happened. It was the power of prayer. He hadn't asked the Lord to save his company. It was God's company too, and if God wanted him to lose it, he had his reasons. But LeTourneau had asked for help honoring the Sabbath. That's exactly what he'd received. From that point forward, LeTourneau's approach to business changed. At 30, he'd made a decision. He would be God's businessman, not a preacher, not a missionary. His sister had challenged him to get serious about serving God, and like many Christians, he'd assumed that meant vocational ministry. His pastor, Reverend Devol, gave him different advice. God needs businessmen as well as preachers and missionaries. That revelation shaped the next 40 years of his life. Business wasn't separate from faith. It was faith. Every machine he designed, every employee he hired, every contract he fulfilled, all of it was partnership with God. And if God was his partner, then the profits weren't really his to keep. Depression success. The year 1929 brought 2 seismic events. R G LeTourneau LeTourneau Incorporated, officially incorporated, and the stock market crashed, plunging America into the Great Depression. For most businesses, the timing couldn't have been worse. For LeTourneau, it was the beginning of exponential growth. While the rest of the country struggled, LeTourneau's business exploded. The revenue numbers tell the story. 1932, net profit of $52,055. By 1934, $340,275. By 1938, over $1.4 million, approximately $31 million in today's dollars. This wasn't luck. This was the result of continuous innovation during a time when infrastructure projects desperately needed efficient earthmoving. In 1933, LeTourneau made a strategic decision: retire from contracting entirely and focus on manufacturing. He'd proven he could move dirt faster and cheaper than anyone else. Now he'd sell the machines that made it possible to everyone else. He built a manufacturing plant in Peoria, Illinois in 1935 to be close to Caterpillar, whose engines powered his equipment. The partnership between LeTourneau Innovation and Caterpillar Power became legendary. The technical breakthroughs came rapid fire. In the early 1930s, LeTourneau replaced the heavy steel wheels that cut into sandy soil with large rubber truck tires. The tire companies thought he was crazy. Nobody made pneumatic tires that big for that kind of weight and pressure. So LeTourneau built his own tire molds and essentially forced the tire industry to catch up with his vision. By the mid-1940s, rubber tires on earth-moving equipment became standard across the industry, a revolution LeTourneau started because steel wheels didn't make sense to him. Then came the Tournepool. In 1937, while recovering from yet another car accident, this time spending 6 months in a full-body cast, LeTourneau designed a stretcher to wheel himself through his factory. Lying immobile gave him time to think about a fundamental problem. His carry-all scraper's efficiency was limited by the tractors pulling it. He needed a specialized tractor unit designed specifically for scraper work. He approached Caterpillar about building a two-wheeled tractor configuration. They refused. The design looked ridiculous. Two large rubber tires, a two-way 90-degree articulated hitch, no apparent stability. It looked, LeTourneau said, as useless as a sulky without a horse. When critics called him crazy, he knew he was on the right track. The Tournepool proved them all wrong. After World War II, every major manufacturer raced to copy his design. Caterpillar eventually adopted the very concept they had refused to build. The two-wheel tractor became standard for scraper operations worldwide. But perhaps the most significant innovation from this period was cultural, not technical. In 1935, LeTourneau and Evelyn made a decision that baffled their accountant and probably should have bankrupted them. They were making serious money now, gigantic profits during the Great Depression. The logical move was to enjoy it, expand conservatively, build wealth for their children. Instead, they established the LeTourneau Foundation and committed 90% of their company stock and 90% of their personal income to it. 90%. Not to the company, not to reinvestment, to religious and educational work, to missions in Africa and South America, to spreading the gospel. Their accountant thought they were insane. How do you live on 10%? How do you run a business when you don't control 90% of your own stock? The math didn't work, except it did. LeTourneau was fond of saying, "I shovel out the money and God shovels it back, but God has a bigger shovel." By 1959, after giving away $10 million in donations, roughly $105 million today, the LeTourneau Foundation was still worth $40 million. The more he gave, the more came back. Not because giving was a financial strategy, but because LeTourneau genuinely believed that everything belonged to God anyway. The question wasn't how much to give God, but how much of God's money to keep for himself. His life verse was Matthew 6:33. "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." He didn't just quote it, he built a business empire on it. In 1935, LeTourneau overcame a lifelong fear of public speaking to give his first address at the opening of his newest plant. He urged his fellow Christians in the room to do more for the Lord in their businesses. Several area pastors immediately asked him to speak to their congregations about Christianity and business. Thus began a second career, traveling evangelist and author, flying around the world in a converted A-26 glass-nosed bomber, long before corporate jets became commonplace. The equipment bore his fingerprints, all welded construction instead of rivets, power where it was needed, control systems that made sense, and a relentless focus on moving more material faster, with fewer people. He held nearly 300 patents by the end of his life. His philosophy was simple: there are no big mountains, just small machines. Then came December the 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, and suddenly the U.S. military needed earth-moving equipment on a scale the world had never seen. War Machine. World War II transformed R G LeTourneau from a successful manufacturer into an industrial legend. The numbers are staggering. LeTourneau LeTourneau factories supplied 70% of all heavy earth-moving equipment used by the Allied forces. Some sources put it at 75%. Either way, the scale was unprecedented. From Pearl Harbor to VJ Day, LeTourneau's plants shipped 28,600 powerful earth-moving machines. The production breakdown: 10,000 carryalls, 14,000 bulldozers, 1,600 sheepfoot rollers, 1,200 rooters, 1,800 tornapulls. The military later calculated that one LeTourneau bulldozer did the work that 1,000 men with shovels had accomplished in World War I. This was the first totally mechanized war, and LeTourneau's machines made mechanization possible. The Allies built roads, military bases, airfields, and defensive positions across Europe, Africa, and Asia in what historians called the greatest dirt-moving project the world has ever seen. Half of the 1,500-mile Alaska Highway, built in just 8 months through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth, was constructed using LeTourneau equipment. Airstrips in the Pacific appeared in days instead of months. Tank barriers and fortifications rose overnight. The industrial capacity to move Earth at scale gave the Allies a strategic advantage that shortened the war. To meet demand, LeTourneau constructed a massive new plant in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Additional facilities followed in Toccoa, Georgia, and what would become his world headquarters in Longview, Texas in 1945. At the height of production, from 1942 to 1945, his fertile mind pumped out 78 new inventions, many instrumental in winning the war. He employed over 6,000 workers across his plants, but LeTourneau never forgot who his real employer was. He established a revolutionary practice: industrial chaplaincy. 3 full-time chaplains served his factory workers. Regular chapel services were offered during work hours. Employees weren't required to attend, but the option was there. Spiritual care, as seriously considered as safety equipment. When asked how many employees he had working for him, LeTourneau would grin and say, "Oh, I'd say about half of them." The self-deprecating humor masked a genuine concern for his workers. He pioneered prefabricated steel-welded homes to house his employees. More than 20 went up near the Peoria plant, while others were floated up and down the Illinois River to their locations. Providing housing wasn't about profit, it was about taking care of people. Weekends, LeTourneau traveled. He spoke at churches, conferences, business gatherings, anywhere people would listen to God's businessman, explain how faith and industry weren't separate spheres, but integrated parts of a whole life. He didn't preach conventional sermons. He told stories about scrapers and electric wheels and tire pressures, about problems solved and contracts won and bankruptcy narrowly avoided. Then he'd pivot to Matthew 6:33 and explain that seeking God's kingdom first didn't mean abandoning excellence in earth moving. It meant pursuing excellence because God deserved your best work. The money poured in during the war years. LeTourneau could have become spectacularly, generationally wealthy. Instead, 90% went to the foundation. Missions in Liberia and Peru, agricultural development projects in underdeveloped nations, educational initiatives, and in 1946, a bold new venture, LeTourneau Technical Institute. The school opened in February 1946 in a converted Army hospital in Longview, Texas. The mission: provide technical education in a Christian environment where students could earn a living while learning. It was designed initially for returning veterans, but quickly expanded. Today it's LeTourneau University, a fully accredited private Christian institution offering degrees in engineering, aviation, liberal arts, and more. The campus sits on land LeTourneau donated, with several of his original machines on outdoor display, monuments to what faith and engineering can build together. In 1953, at age 65, most men would have retired. LeTourneau sold his entire earth-moving equipment line, plants, land, machinery, inventory, to Westinghouse Air Brake Company for $31 million. That's roughly $360 million in current dollars. He signed a non-compete agreement 5 years out of the earth-moving business. People assumed he was done. They didn't know R G LeTourneau very well. Electric dreams. Retirement wasn't in LeTourneau's vocabulary. At 65, with a $31 million windfall and a 5-year exile from earth-moving, he did what he'd always done. He invented. For years, LeTourneau had been developing electric drive systems for his equipment. The concept was similar to diesel-electric locomotives. A diesel engine spun a generator, which sent power to electric motors. This eliminated complex mechanical transmissions, drive shafts, and differentials, all sources of power loss and mechanical failure. Electric drive meant smoother operation, better torque distribution, and most importantly, the ability to place motors exactly where you needed them. During his 5-year exile, LeTourneau perfected the electric wheel. The innovation was elegantly simple. Put an electric motor directly in the wheel hub. Each wheel operated independently, powered by its own motor, controlled separately. No driveline losses, no complicated gearing, just clean, direct power to the ground. The implications were revolutionary. With electric wheels, you could build machines that were previously impossible. LeTourneau's imagination, freed from conventional constraints, went wild. He designed giant tree crushers that could knock down and chew up trees 5 feet in diameter, cutting a 35-foot swath through jungle. He built overland trains for the Arctic, the TC-264 snow buggy, the longest off-road vehicle ever built at the time, stretching 274 feet with 24 7.3-foot tall wheels, capable of hauling 150 tons across any terrain. He designed log stackers and log loaders. He created machines that could cast concrete houses in a single pour. He built mobile offshore drilling platforms on retractable 140-foot legs that opened up oil exploration in ways fixed platforms never could. The offshore drilling venture represented classic LeTourneau risk-taking. He reached a deal with George H.W. Bush, then president of Zapata Oil Company, to build the first mobile drilling rig, the Scorpion, at his own expense. If it worked, LeTourneau would receive close to $1 million and company stock. If it failed, he'd absorb all manufacturing costs. It worked. The first jack-up drilling rig came off his Longview production line in 1954, revolutionizing offshore oil exploration. Today's massive offshore platforms trace their lineage directly to LeTourneau's mid-1950s innovations. In 1958, his non-compete agreement expired. LeTourneau was 70 years old. He re-entered the earth-moving equipment business with machines based entirely on his electric wheel technology. The designs were utterly unique: wheel loaders, scrapers, and transporters, unlike anything competitors produced. Size and power that seemed impossible became routine in LeTourneau's hands. The consummate expression of his electric wheel concept was the Series LT360 Model A8 electric digger motor scraper. This machine defied belief. 3 bowls with a combined 216-yard capacity, hauling 360 tons of material. It rode on 8 massive tires, 60 by 68, 72 ply, 122 inches in diameter, each mounted on an electric wheel. 8 635 horsepower Detroit diesel engines provided 5,080 total horsepower. The operator sat in an elevated cab between the first and second bowls, controlling 200 feet of machine that was 19 feet wide. The LT360 performed flawlessly on the proving grounds. It could scoop 150 tons of dirt in 2 minutes, one gulp from each of its 2 75-ton payload buckets. But it may have been too big. No sales resulted. LeTourneau didn't care. Before he died, he drew up plans for an even bigger machine, the LT500, designed to haul 500 tons with 9,600 horsepower. His philosophy hadn't changed since he was leveling land in Stockton. There are no big mountains, just small machines. If a job seemed impossible, you needed a bigger machine. If the machine didn't exist, you invented it. Age didn't slow him down. At 77, in 1965, he received something that made him laugh: a diploma in engineering from International Correspondence Schools, 50 years after he'd started their course and never finished the assignments. He jovially remarked to his executive assistant, "So now I've got a diploma. Now I'm educated." The diploma joined 299 patents and dozens of honorary doctorates from universities that recognized what formal education couldn't teach: the ability to see what should exist and make it real. In 1966, at age 77, LeTourneau handed over company leadership to his son, Richard, but retirement still wasn't the plan. Every day you could find RG at his drawing board in his modest office, designing new ways to move larger loads faster and more economically. He'd arrive early, stay late, and spend the hours in between doing what he loved, playing with his big toys. 2 years before his death, he recorded his thoughts about the future. Within the next few years, construction machinery will grow bigger and more powerful. Instead of tons of capacity, they'll all be in hundreds of tons. And instead of hundreds of horsepower, they'll all be rated in thousands of horsepower. We're already seeing it in big hauling units in the mines. And believe me, when the contractor and mining companies start looking for bigger and more profitable hauling units and earth-moving equipment, I'm going to be right there, the firstest with the mostest. He was right about the future. He just wouldn't be there to see it. The final blueprint, March 1969. LeTourneau was 80 years old, still arriving at his office daily, still sketching machines that didn't yet exist. Then a severe stroke felled him. The man who'd survived Spanish influenza, a broken neck, countless accidents, and 8 decades of relentless work couldn't recover from this. He died on June 1st, 1969, in Longview, Texas. He was survived by his wife Evelyn and their children, sons Richard, Roy, Ted, and Ben, and daughter Louise Dick. His sons had been active active in the business. Richard now led what remained of LeTourneau Technologies. They buried RG on the campus of LeTourneau University, the school he and Evelyn had founded 23 years earlier. His grave sits beneath a simple marker. At the foot of the grave, they inscribed his life verse, Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. 3 of his original earth-moving machines stand as outdoor monuments on the campus, steel and rubber testimonies to what one man's mind could conceive. The R G LeTourneau Memorial Museum and Archives occupies space in Heath Hardwick Hall, chronicling the life of one of the most influential Christians of the 20th century, the man, the machines, and the mission. But the business story gets complicated. In 1970, just a year after RG's death, LeTourneau Technologies was sold to Marathon Manufacturing Company, becoming Marathon LeTourneau Company. The new owners continued producing earth-moving and marine technologies, capitalizing on LeTourneau's electric wheel innovations during the offshore oil boom of the 1970s and 1980s. In 1994, Rowan Companies acquired Marathon LeTourneau for $50 million and rebranded it as LeTourneau Incorporated, focusing primarily on offshore drilling rigs. In 2011, Joy Global purchased LeTourneau Technologies. In 2017, Komatsu acquired Joy Global, absorbing LeTourneau's technologies into the massive Japanese mining corporation. Today, if you walk through a modern mining operation, you'll find enormous wheel loaders, some still manufactured at the Longview plant, moving hundreds of tons with electric drive systems pioneered by a 6th-grade dropout from Vermont. But they don't carry the LeTourneau name. The corporate absorptions erase the branding. The large log loaders manufactured by what's now Komatsu Mining Corporation still sometimes carry LeTourneau on their sides, a ghost of the proud old name. The irony is sharp. LeTourneau predicted machines would grow to hundreds of tons and thousands of horsepower. He was exactly right. The L235 zero-wheel loader, built in Longview in 2000, was the largest front-end loader in the world. Today's mining equipment routinely moves 400-ton loads. The technology he pioneered, electric wheels, diesel-electric drive, hub motors, powers the biggest earth movers on the planet. But his name faded faster than his innovations. What remains? The LeTourneau Foundation still exists, managing the endowment from that audacious 90% commitment. LeTourneau University thrives with over 1,400 students studying engineering, aviation, business, education, and liberal arts in an explicitly Christian environment. The Longview manufacturing plant continues operation under Komatsu's ownership, building equipment for global mining operations from Montana to Brazil to Australia. Agricultural development projects, LeTourneau funded in Liberia and Peru, changed communities for generations. The LeTourneau Christian Center Camp and Conference Grounds in Rushville, New York, still serves thousands annually. Mission work the foundation supported in the 1940s and 1950s planted churches that continue today. The technical legacy is everywhere and nowhere. Electric wheel drive, standard on large mining equipment. Rubber tires on earth movers, universal. Single operator scrapers. Industry baseline. Offshore mobile drilling platforms. Transformed the energy sector. The Tourneau's articulated design, every major manufacturer copied it. Walk into any construction site in the world, and you're walking into a space shaped by LeTourneau's innovations, even if nobody knows his name anymore. The efficiency gains he pioneered, moving more material with fewer people in less time, became the baseline expectation. What seemed impossible in 1920 became standard by 1960, and LeTourneau was the primary driver. But the real question is deeper than technical legacy. It's about the 90%. In 1935, when LeTourneau and Evelyn committed to living on 10% of their income and giving away 90%, they violated every principle of wealth building. You're supposed to reinvest, grow, compound, build generational wealth. They did the opposite. They shoveled money out as fast as it came in. By any conventional measure, they should have stunted their business growth. They should have fallen behind competitors who kept their profits. They should have limited their capacity to innovate by starving the company of capital. Instead, the business exploded. From $52,000 profit in 1932 to $1.4 million in 1938. From regional manufacturer to global wartime supplier. From one plant to facilities on 4 continents. The more they gave away, the more came back. Not because giving is a prosperity formula, but because LeTourneau genuinely believed God owned it all and acted accordingly. God's businessman wasn't a marketing slogan. It was his operational philosophy. When he said God ran his business, he meant it literally. Every design decision, every hiring choice, every contract negotiation operated under the assumption that this was partnership, not solo venture. The slide rule in one hand, hand, the Bible in the other. People said it jokingly, but it was true. He employed industrial chaplains when competitors thought he was wasting money. He built employee housing when it made no financial sense. He spent weekends flying around the world to speak at churches for free when he could have been skiing or golfing or doing whatever rich men did with their leisure time. He founded a university when he could have bought a yacht, and he gave away $10 million, over $105 million in today's dollars, by 1959, with the foundation still worth $40 million. Then he sold the earth-moving division for $31 million, $360 million today, and gave 90% of that away too. In modern business culture, R G LeTourneau is an anomaly. We understand entrepreneurs who build wealth. We understand philanthropists who give it away after they've made it. We don't quite know what to do with someone who gave it away while making it, who structured his entire business operation around the principle that he was a steward, not an owner. There's a statue of LeTourneau in Glen Oak Park in Peoria, near the tennis courts. A twin statue stands on the LeTourneau University campus. Both show a large man with a friendly face, and both bear the inscription of Matthew 6:33. People walk past them without much thought. The name doesn't carry the weight it once did. But somewhere in a Chilean copper mine, an electric wheel loader scoops 60 tons of ore, while the operator drinks coffee in an air-conditioned cab, doing the work that would have required 200 men with shovels. Somewhere in Western Australia, a haul truck with hub-mounted electric motors carries 400 tons of iron ore across terrain that would have been impassable in 1940. Somewhere in Montana, a modern scraper with rubber tires and single-operator controls shapes a roadbed in hours instead of weeks. And somewhere, a student at LeTourneau University studies mechanical engineering, funded in part by an endowment established by a man who believed that seeking God's kingdom first didn't mean abandoning excellence. It meant pursuing it for the right reasons. The bigger shovel. In 1927, R G LeTourneau stood $100,000 in debt, demanded to work Sundays or lose everything. He refused. He gave his tithe when he had no money to give. The business survived and then exploded. In 1935, he committed to giving away 90% when conventional wisdom said you can't build on 10%. The business grew faster than ever. In 1953, he sold for $31 million and gave 90% away when he could have built dynastic wealth. He spent the next 16 years inventing machines that opened up offshore oil drilling and Arctic transportation. In 1969, he died at age 80. Still designing at his drawing board, still believing the next machine could be better, still convinced that there are no big jobs, just small machines. The corporate entities that absorbed his company have market capitalizations in the billions. Komatsu, which now owns what remains of his Longview operations, is one of the largest heavy equipment manufacturers in the world. The technologies LeTourneau pioneered generate billions in annual revenue, but none of them give away 90%. Modern business celebrates efficiency, innovation, scale, and shareholder returns. LeTourneau achieved all of those while operating under a completely different principle. It's not your money. It never was. You're a steward. The question isn't how much to give back. It's how much to keep. I shovel out the money, and God shovels it back, he'd say with a grin. But God has a bigger shovel. The 21st century has produced remarkable entrepreneurs, tech billionaires, hedge fund managers, real estate tycoons. Many give generously through foundations and charitable trusts. We applaud their philanthropy. But how many structure their entire business model around the principle that 90% doesn't belong to them in the first place? LeTourneau's legacy isn't just in the electric wheels or the offshore platforms or the rubber tires. It's in the radical proposition that you can seek God's kingdom first. Actually first, not after you've secured your financial future, and still build something that changes the world. He was a 6th grade dropout who learned engineering through correspondence courses he never finished. He broke his neck racing cars and nearly died from Spanish flu. He failed in business before he succeeded. He designed machines that experts said were impossible, and when they worked, the experts copied them. He gave away more money than most people make in 10 lifetimes, and died with more wealth than he started with. He built a manufacturing empire during the Great Depression. He supplied 70% of the equipment that won World War II. He revolutionized offshore oil drilling at age 70. He founded a university that's still educating engineers today, and he did it all with a slide rule in one hand and a Bible in the other, convinced that God needed valued businessmen as much as preachers, that moving dirt could be an act of worship, that financial success was a test of stewardship, not an end in itself. The machines got bigger, just as he predicted. The name faded, just as he probably expected. But the principle remains, challenging every entrepreneur who hears it. What if it's not really yours? What if seeking first the kingdom actually produces the results Jesus promised? What if the man who gave 90% understood something about shovels that modern business has forgotten? R G LeTourneau moved heaven and earth. The heaven part was always more important to him. If you worked for LeTourneau, your kids learned from his chaplains, lived in his employee housing, and went to his university. If you're reading this, you've driven on roads his machines built and used products, shipped on infrastructure his innovations made possible. If you've benefited from offshore oil production, or modern mining, or efficient earth moving, you've inherited technologies he pioneered. And if you've ever wondered whether you can serve God and build something excellent in the marketplace, whether faith and business can integrate instead of competing, whether giving generously and succeeding financially can coexist, R G LeTourneau answered those questions with 299 patents, $31 million in sales, $10 million in giving, and a grin that said, God's shovel is always bigger. He was just a mechanic whom the Lord blessed, a 6th grade dropout who believed that the problem wasn't the mountain's size, but the machine's smallness. A businessman who decided that if God needed businessmen, then business itself could be ministry. The dean of earth moving died in 1969. The machines got bigger. The kingdom work continued. And somewhere, God's still shoveling back with the bigger shovel.